Well, it's 3:15, so we'll probably get started. We'll see if anybody else comes in, but thank you for joining us today. My name is Jennifer Perry, and I represent Insurance Board, which is a nonprofit organization that offers a property and liability insurance program, as well as we offer lots of loss control resources, including many related to abuse prevention. Jack Cunningham, sitting at the table here, this is my colleague. He's our loss control director. He's going to kind of manage anybody who's online and has questions, and he might chime in here and there. I really appreciate you all attending. Quickly, it might be helpful just for me to know what your role is within your organization, if you are working for a church or for like an independent organization. If you wouldn't mind.
Senior pastor of church.
Okay, great.
I just got hired, like the paperwork isn't, the ink isn't dry yet, as a Christian educator.
Okay.
But I've been managing the safe sanctuary requirements for my congregation for 3+ years. And I don't know what I'm doing.
It's a lot of work, a lot of administrative work, for sure.
So I'm Nancy. I work for a presbytery, 97 congregations, so my work supporting resource, but also developing content, including training for abuse prevention and healthy boundaries.
Great.
I work here at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary with a program that has in the past and will again this summer be working with minors, so we're in the process of relearning all the clearances and compliances, particularly in Pennsylvania, post-Sandusky, post-Boy Scout. It's a pretty, in a good way and for the right reasons, highly regimented. So I figured if there's a workshop on that sort of stuff, that's for me.
Great. We're just quickly introducing ourselves and saying what kind of organization.
You're in.
Sorry.
You're up.
My name is Brian Wallace. I serve on the staff of Pittsburgh Presbytery. So we have, as the board requirements have changed around boundary training, it's like my least favorite topic that I have to know a lot about.
Yeah,
For sure.
It's no one's favorite topic.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's a topic that I need to know a lot about.
Yes.
No, I'm going to push back on that. I love having these conversations because I always say healthy congregations have healthy boundaries, and healthy boundaries help create healthy congregations.
for sure. You guys get to teach this class. And I'll need your help. There's only a couple of us in here, so you don't want to hear me all afternoon. Hi, welcome. We were just introducing ourselves and saying what type of organization we work for. If you want to let us know.
Lynn Haps, Director of Christian Education, Presbyterian Church.
Great, nice to meet you. So I run Insurance Board's internal insurance agency, so I serve a lot of the middle judicatories, including presbyteries or individual churches that participate in our program, as well as I have gone through the Faith Trust Institute Training the Trainer training and the Presidium Certified Guardian training. We'll talk about Presidium a little bit. Before we get into that, this is a tough topic, so just kind of put a little trigger warning in there, but anytime you need to take a break, walk out, feel free to do so. Make sure you're taking care of yourself through this. Jen.
I'm sorry, I want to represent the online group.
Yes, thank you.
So we do have 2 online with us, Maddie Williams, who is the Faith Formation Coordinator for 5th grade and under at the church in Weatherford, Texas, warmer than we are here. And we have Annie Hovey, the youth ministers at Indian Hill Church in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Excellent.
OH.
Welcome.
Okay.
So one of our business partners is Presidium. They're located out of Arlington, Texas, and a national leader in resource management. So they help us offer a lot of resources to the ministries and denominations that we serve. So just a little introduction to them. And a lot of Presidium's research is evidence-based. They've worked for YMCAs and other organizations for many, many years. So just, some of the statistics, 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before they turn 18. 90% of offenders are known by their victim or their victim's family, and more than 60 million survivors of child sexual abuse in America, and 80% of those have potentially never reported their abuse. So So why is this important to our churches and other organizations? Well, churches provide access to children a lot of times. And whether you have volunteer shortages or whatever, staffing shortages, you need people to help support your ministries in many ways. And oftentimes within a church structure, there's an imbalance of power and authority. So predators might use positions of spiritual authority to gain access to children, or other abuses of power. Sometimes within a church too, churches, I oftentimes say, are late adopters to some best practices, unfortunately. So predators may seek out churches that kind of have that culture, because they maybe feel like they can infiltrate them a little bit easier. Hi, welcome. And then, unfortunately, historically, churches have shown us that they cover up some of these incidents that have happened historically as well. Kind of, close relationships, oftentimes trusting environments, immediate access to kids, many times lax screening, protocols. You're serving vulnerable populations a lot of time, and there's inherent power differentials. Oops. Sorry, I don't know why that froze there. Okay, we'll just go to the next one. Kind of talked about the abuse of power within a church. What we know about predators is that they oftentimes need access, privacy, and control in order to cause harm within organizations. And so, when they infiltrate, some of the effects that they can have on your organizations is there could be a loss of focus to your ministry. It could potentially jeopardize your insurability long term. Many times these results in, $1 million verdicts or more. It tends to be like a loss of your congregants, maybe a rift between many in your organization, because there's a lot of emotions that come with these types of issues that happen, loss of reputational damage, and threats to your ministry. This is a little chart, if you're familiar with the publication Church Law and Tax by Richard Hammer. He publishes this every year. It's usually the same 5 topics in similar order, but all the time, sexual abuse of a minor is one of the top 5 reasons that churches end up in court. And then if you've kind of been involved in some of the news over the last several years, we've heard about the Boy Scouts of America bankruptcy filing and the impact that this has had, especially on sexual abuse liability, and the lawsuit that has come with that resulted in a $2.46 billion settlement. There's been the Me Too movement, the Church Too movement, that's resulted in an increase in reporting of especially sexual harassment claims. And so really there's more of a focus on trauma-informed approaches in ministry. So Presidium's solution to help reduce the risk of these types of claims and issues within your organizations is to follow their safety equation. And so this is, a result of sort of a multi-pronged approach to help your different organizations approach this topic. So it's really based on root cause analysis of thousands of cases of abuse that they have reviewed in organizations over time. So there's these 8 organizational operations that are crucial to the prevention and detection of sexual abuse. We always kind of talk about how important it is to create a culture of safety in your organizations. And so what that means is that, your whole team is really on board to keep the well-being of those in their care at the forefront of what you do. So that means that your leadership is committed, your standards are clear and enforced, everyone knows that safety is a part of their job, you take the warning signs seriously, you report concerns, and your staff engagement is high. Do you all feel like you have kind of created a culture of safety, or is this really a challenge within your organizations?
I've been in both situations of it being an
I've been in churches that it's been a huge challenge to get them on board with things, and then I've been in churches that are like, yeah, this is important, we need to do this, and the whole range in between. So like I see a lot of different things about how we care and keep the door locked for this, and just being aware of lots of different things. It's very fascinating how the culture of the church itself affects this, where I wish it was just a no-brainer.
Right. I think we see that on a regular basis, just with the inquiries and calls and things that we, receive on a daily basis. And it really doesn't matter the size of the organization. There's those challenges that happen either way. And you're right, creating that culture is really important because it carries you through and helps you to create and place some importance on those best practices long term. And obviously when you participate in an event like this at APCE, professional ethics is important to you. The organization stresses that, and so that kind of plays into your work in general. Kind of within the workshop today, Presidium oftentimes uses the terms staff and consumer, and so the way that they define that is staff is either your employee, volunteer, anyone that's associated with your individual organization, and consumer is those that you serve, basically. So just kind of, as you see those terms, that's what they mean. Oops. And then as we sort of go through those 8 organizational approaches, just kind of think about your particular organization and maybe kind of do some self-analysis about whether or not you fall into the complacency category, compliance category, or commitment category for each of these. And really the goal is to prevent abuse, so whether that's staff to consumer abuse, consumer to consumer abuse, or even just combating false allegations, because that could really have a big impact on your ministry too. So step 1 is to establish policies. Do we all have a policy? Okay, good. So within that policy, we want to make sure we're defining our boundaries. We want to really clearly list the types of conduct that is prohibited in your organization, and definitely communicate a zero tolerance towards abuse. You want to create institutional memory, formalize those policies regarding the different interactions and responding procedures, take warning signs of inappropriate behavior seriously, treat each case the same, and don't minimize or excuse anyone's behavior, and you need to communicate about those policies. So create a plan to distribute new abuse prevention, anti-harassment policies, and consider, how to use multiple platforms to do that, to reach those that you're serving and that really need to review that information and be aware of that. Yeah.
Sorry, I gotta jump in here just because of a call I had today already.
For sure.
So you all raise your hand that you got policies. That is awesome, right? Everybody's got a policy. My question back to you is, so by the way, I come from loss control. Risk mitigation, right? Is your policy longer than 2 pages? Let me ask that question, all right? Because it needs to be more than 2 pages. 2 pages is pretty much giving you enough to be dangerous, but not enough to really guide. Does that make sense to everybody? So really, as we're going back and you're talking to your other churches, you're talking to colleagues and everything, and you're really looking at, as Jennifer said, it's great, what's our policy, how are we communicating it, how are we sharing it, because it has to be part of the whole church aspect. It has to be more than a couple of pages, because you're not getting enough information in there on the guidelines, on the do's and don'ts, and what really needs to be addressed. So really look at your policies and look at, do we have enough? And I'm going to jump some of yours and stuff here, sorry. But on our website, we have template policies that Presidium has helped us develop in a modular format. So everything's there. Now it's not a Word doc, so you cannot play the game, find your place. I don't like that game. I love all other games, but not that one. But you still can cut and paste, but you got to read through it. And remember, your policies are always based on what your church or organization is going to follow. Don't Because if we do find and replace and it doesn't really pertain to our church, if something happens, that can come back and be very dangerous to us in the litigation aspect. So really make sure everybody's following that policy and everybody agrees to follow that policy and really have it into play, right? So it just popped in my head on that one, and I'm interacting with somebody live now that has a 2-page and wondering, should we follow that or not? So just want to share.
Important info, thanks. The last thing that I'll say about policies is really like, I look at it as they should define your bandwidth of acceptable behaviors within your organization. So really be clear about that, provide lists, whatever you need to do to better define that. So when we talk about boundaries, these are guidelines that help us maintain our integrity within relationships that we have with others, and they help us keep people safe. So within the 2025 APCE Educator Certification Handbook, it said, certified Christian educators shall provide a certificate of completion of boundary training, which includes the topic of sexual misconduct and child sexual abuse prevention training, with recertification of the leader at least every 36 months. The presbytery shall determine which trainings are approved to meet these 2 requirements. And really within PCUSA denomination as well, there's been some changes to the Book of War that are requiring like your session members and things like that to complete these trainings. Are you having challenges, getting people to do this? And yeah. Gotcha.
I will say though, one that I heard from a pastor, and he reflected to me that, we've been doing this for a while. And it used to be sort of roundly resistant. We don't need to do that here, we're not like that. And now people say, yeah, we do need to do this. Yeah, we do want to, in part it's because we've heard the awful stories, but in part it's also because there's a growing understanding that this is how we need to be, not because it's imposed on us, but it is because how God calls us to be with each other.
And those of us at the presbytery level, it almost seems like each individual presbytery needs to communicate to the churches within your presbytery what your expectations are to meet this training. Have you had an opportunity to do that? Do you feel like you have to find the resources and pass that along? And what have been some of the challenges and successes that you found within that process?
I mean, the challenge is that we can't get sessions to get the minutes read.
Much less.
And so, in our context, we've got 118 congregations. Some of them don't speak. I mean, I think the challenge is really twofold. One is anything that comes from the General Assembly comes with a statement, right? It's just, that's not a thing we always do. My personal frustration is that it gets lumped in with some of the other things, like now every council has to have an anti-racism policy. And so those become so intangible, right? Of like, we will not be racist. Well, that's not what we meant, but we understand what you're saying. It is frustrating to watch this get lumped in with that, because we've gone to sessions and said, look, like, you need child protection policies. I do think here we have a little bit, in Pennsylvania, we have had 10 years where we could say, do you want to be Penn State? And that has really helped. I mean, that has really helped. And you get and especially in our churches, there's a Penn State alum at every session. And all you have to say is, Jerry Sandusky was a great guy, right? I think the other frustration, and I've actually heard this multiple times, is well, I know so and so, and they would never. And my response is, if I ever sexually abused a child, it's the first thing that people would say to me too. And so some of it has just been fighting back against some of those, myths of but also just the sheer volume of compliance requirements have been dropped from the last, because God love our General Assembly, the way to fix anything is to make you write a policy about it. And so that's what we really have struggled with. So we've got to do this, this, and this. And if they don't get the minutes right, we have no way of knowing. So.
Well, like you mentioned, Pennsylvania has even taken some legislative action.
Yes, and that's been the best thing has been we've said, well, you're out of compliance with state law.
Right. So, and we're starting to see that in other states as well. It's just challenging for organizations to navigate because a lot of times there's a lot of gray area to that, kind of for them to start adopting it. In California, they define folks that have to comply with their recent assembly bill as youth-serving organizations. So there's been a lot of, back and forth as to what defines a youth-serving organization. So, but I think we're gonna see a lot more of that as time goes on, is that the individual states, might develop some required legislation for different organizations serving youth to participate. Please.
For me, just because I've been in a lot of different spaces that work with children, such as educational spaces, and public schools, private schools, and other organizational things, I'm always reminding people, because they're like, oh, well, we got everybody's clearances. I'm like, yep, that just means they haven't been caught.
Right.
So keep that in mind. It's sad, but true. It just means they haven't been caught and charged.
Right.
Or something like that.
And convicted.
And convicted, yes. There was a horrifying incident in my small community with a family that my family knew, we thought, very well. And the male father in this situation committed heinous crimes against his own family for years, and none of us had any idea. He was so charming, he was so direct, he was so wonderful, he served people, and it was only because he got caught doing something else somewhere else that they found what he had been doing to his family. And I'm like, that story haunts me. You say, well, I know that. It wouldn't
Right.
be that, but it did happen.
Right.
And it's awful, but we do have to be careful and be well educated on warning signs and being very clear about our policies and stuff. Clearances are great, and it does deter some people if they don't understand it. Maybe I shouldn't do that, but they're not a
Right, it's only one piece of, that puzzle. That's why Presidium refers to it as a safety equation. So there's those, 8 components that in the end, you're hoping to create a safe environment. But you need all of those, and you need eyes on it, and you need to, review it and retrain on it and all these things, in order to continue to hopefully keep your organization safe as well. Right. And so Brian had mentioned too, kind of some of these other policies. Well, I think just like an awareness that your abuse prevention policy might flow into some of these other things that your organization, should potentially have in place, whether that's an employee handbook, like you said, anti-harassment policy, personal conduct policy, facility use agreements, vendor agreements, things like that. So depending on all of the operations that your organization does and who you interact with on a regular basis, some of this may all flow together. And including different things within your policy that maybe you never had before, as kind of in the digital age and things develop. If you haven't looked at it in 10 years or 15 years, do you need to add a component about electronic communications? Do you need to address, what's appropriate physical contact now versus maybe what was more appropriate years ago? Addressing verbal interactions, staff cell phone use policies, things like that. The second operation is the screening and selection process. So in this process, you want to be able to really identify those red flag behaviors through your screening process, determine patterns of behavior through your behavioral-based interview questions, and define the level of access to the consumers. Think about that really, through this screening and selection process of what additional vetting you might need to do for the person that you're looking at and what their access will be, and then implement best practices for background checks. And so the more information that you have about this particular person, then you're able to really make thoughtful hiring or volunteer decisions long term. So when we talk about that level of access, we want to think about the frequency, the duration, the privacy type of relationship that they might have with those we're serving within our organization. And then your application process. So, I think it's really important, the one thing that I would highlight on here is your application process should clearly communicate that you have a zero tolerance for abuse. Like, at that process, set that precedent, and all throughout, your hiring or volunteer selection process, that should be communicated. And then, just kind of interviewing best practices, ask those behavioral-based questions, identify any red flag behaviors, things like that. Past behavior is really a good indicator of future behavior. So maybe, use some questions like, tell me about a time, or describe a situation, things like that, to really kind of dig in if you kind of notice any concerning items about someone. And then do those reference checks. So, make sure you have the right type of references, review the list of references with the applicant, again, looking for any red flags within communication about that. And then the background screenings. Yes.
There you go.
Yeah, exactly. So you can't rely on background screenings alone, yes.
So our program has both, we'll next year have high school students, but we also have undergraduates who, it's not a perfect analogy, but it's sort of like they're counselors at a camp.
Yeah.
So I could be an 18-year-old undergraduate and have a record that's sealed or expunged because I'm a juvenile. Do you have recommendations about how to get the information you need without asking a rec vendor to say, hey, you know any dirty secrets about the applicant? Because you want to not get yourself into legal trouble asking a question in a employment situation that you're not allowed to ask, but you also want to make sure you're turning over every rock to make sure there's nothing underneath it.
In this particular question, if that might be the case, like doing additional reference checks, for someone that's newly turned 18 and could potentially have, a background that you can't access. That might be a good way to handle it, talking to more people, getting more references for that person, asking additional behavioral-based questions just to really get a sense of that person. Things like that. Chad, do you have any suggestions more for that?
I actually say the same thing, just looking at what's coming in. And you can do a search even in the juvenile court system.
Okay.
And just to see if something might just come around. But most time you go
How
get
does
it
one
in
go about that?
clerk reports,
At the state level?
or city
City level.
Even if
City
it's
county level.
sealed, like,
It does,
It will just, you can't see anything, but you can see if there's something there.
oh, gotcha.
So
Okay.
we'll say,
in
it's a thing for Brian, but it won't
It'll
tell me it's a
ping.
thing for
In
Brian.
Pennsylvania, anybody over 14,
Okay.
you have to run clearances on.
Yes.
Oh,
So-
yeah,
So for summer camp, all our kids were 16, 17,
yeah, ours
and
too.
those hits will carry over.
Right.
Like,
Okay.
Even if you're participants as campers, you still check them?
if there's any leadership roles, so, because we've had kids under the age of 18 serving in leadership roles at camp, and we've required them to do their clearances. You don't have to do the FBI. That's the one.
Okay,
You're just looking at your
we've done
mobile
that for
items.
ours, yeah.
But a lot of it, you'll come up into that conversational piece. So we're doing your interviews, those behavioral questions. Give them a scenario, how are they answering it? Especially when it comes to being alone with somebody. You're talking with somebody alone in the cabin.
Yeah.
What would you do? And those responses, those are the behavioral responses, those responses should dictate how they're thinking.
Yeah.
If they don't think it's a problem, or say, well, I need to call somebody else in, or I need to say, all right, let's talk, but not in the cabin, let's go outside, sort of thing. So having those questions set up that way, is that behavioral aspect, is one way to start looking at some of these flags. To still performing your background checks and screening, and then your references, talking to different people. Because people will tell you, if you ask a question the right way, which isn't going against the law, people will tell you. Very much so. I mean, I've had it where I've had calls where it was from overseas. A pastor from overseas came over to do a church, and there was a phone call from the church, and they called me going, what should we do? You haven't hired him yet, send him back. They were sponsoring it. So it will come through. It will come through. And let's talk about some of your questions and things like that. So, but
Yeah, well, and things like, is there any reason I should not hire John Jones to work with kids this summer?
yeah, that's a great question.
Yes.
And your references.
Would you feel comfortable with John Jones?
With
you
your
know,
child.
right? So you're not asking, give me the deeds,
Right.
but, you know, if their former coach says, I could not recommend him to work with other youths, that is a really strong sign.
June?
I was wondering, how often do I need to do background checks on somebody who's been volunteering for years?
What is your policy?
So in Pennsylvania,
Never heard this one.
volunteer clearance is 5 years.
5, yeah.
Or expire after 5 years. That doesn't dictate how often you need to do them.
So if we're saying 3 years,
They'll be like, oh, my clearances are still good.
though summer camp, it's every year.
Yeah.
Most best practices are 2 years.
Okay.
Every 2 years, you should be doing some type of check.
Yeah, I always thought 5 was kind of.
5's a lot. That's a long time.
Especially since the volunteer ones are free. Like in Pennsylvania. But
Not in North Carolina.
No,
if you're hiring, they need to do the employee one. But they're like $25.
those are points. But yeah, you should do it every 2 years because things change in a couple years. In 5 years especially, things change. To me, that's too long. But any volunteers, anybody working with youth or vulnerable adults, best practice is 2 years. I kind of say no more than 3 because sometimes stuff happens and everybody panics. Just don't go past 3 years. But best practice is 2 years.
Right. So just to kind of wrap up this section, you want to make sure that your application assesses for abuse risk. You want to use those behavioral interview questions. You want to check both personal and professional references and run a variety of background checks. And that might mean like a motor vehicle report in addition to the background screening, you know, kind of thinking of some other things to really properly vet those that you're looking at. Okay, so number 3 in our safety equation is training. So you really, you know, effective abuse prevention training gives employees and volunteers the information and skills they need to keep those in their care safe. So training must be frequent, specific, and immediately useful on the job. So you need to identify who needs to be trained, differentiate the content for each group, create a plan for training frequency, and, you know, obviously this is essential to creating that culture of safety. Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, I always make sure to help congregations know. I want you all to thank all the Sunday school teachers and volunteers. They all spent Saturday doing their training, right? So everybody in that congregation hears that and knows that. If there are predators, they're not gonna stick around because they know not only are the volunteers trained, the rest of the congregation now is aware as well.
Right. It starts to get too risky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and it's, well, if, you know, Jane can do the training, you know, then I shouldn't have a problem, you know, next time I volunteer or getting my background checked or whatever, you know, the situation is, for sure. And then just kind of within your organization, I think communicating is really important. So, you know, just generally talk about how offenders operate, you know, how to prevent the abuse within your organizations. A lot of times, whether it's a church or camp or youth organization that's might be even youth to youth, how to recognize high risk activities in areas to look out for, how to prevent false allegations, and then how to report suspicions and concerns and recognize signs of abuse in victims. And so all this training really contributes to your culture of safety. You know, it definitely conveys your organization's commitment to safety. It builds commitment to organizational change and policies and teaches all staff at different levels of their role in your overall risk management. Creates a common language amongst your organization as well and demonstrates your due diligence and staff professional skills. So just as you're thinking about the training, you know, within your organizations, you would define the categories that apply to you. And then think about the delivery of the training, the frequency, how many times you might need to repeat it, and then enforce those requirements. So again, just kind of reviewing this section, think about groups that you're not currently training on abuse prevention training and if it would be important to do so. Is there content that you're not currently covering for any of your audiences? Do you need to change the frequency of your training, and what steps do you need to take to ensure that the training is completed? Chad, yes,
Sorry, can I ask another question to the group?
please, absolutely.
I love data. So let me ask, you all do training, right? I've heard some of you say we train, we're developing training, so on and so forth. When we talk about training, what does training mean to you all? What's that? What are you training? It's not a trick question. And online you can answer also. Just type it in the chat. What do you think?
So in our setting, we offer regularly, it's called boundary training for working with children. So the target audience is actually church staff and pastors. And so that for us ends up being a day-long thing with kind of 2 points of emphasis. One is really around personal boundaries and conduct, right? Of like what you should and should not do. And the second part is really oriented around some of the same kind of stuff of like, how do you build a culture of safety in your congregation and your volunteers?
So we get boundary training, because all pastors and everything need to roll that. So we hear that a lot. Boundary training is mostly the same out of all denominations. But when we go down to our volunteers, who's actually really interacting with it, we'll say quote unquote the day-to-day, what training are we providing them? Because I hear the gamut. I hear everything from, we do a training, I said, all right, deliver me the training, let me see your training. And basically it's a PowerPoint of their policy. Let me ask this group, is that training just enough for policy for what Jennifer has just been talking about? Absolutely not. Should it be there? Yes. However, because everybody needs to know policy, so new people should be trained on policy. What's the red flags? Let's be trained on what red flags are of behaviors and different things, right? What are those? Let's be trained in are we mandated reporters, whether by law or not, depending on different states some are not. However, my thing is, if you're dealing with you're a mandated reporter, just because it's the right thing to do. So are we educating our volunteers on what a mandated reporter should be doing, or a reporter, and where does that have? And how does that tie back into our policy processes? Because we should have that in our policy processes, whether it's in our abuse prevention policy or if it's a full-time staff in our hiring and employee handbook. So all these kind of connect, but we need to try to get outside of the concept of, if I do my policy, that's training and that's enough, right? It's what we've always done. We have to get through that mindset, because I know you've all heard that. And I'm sure some of you have said that. Guilty here also. We've always done it that way, so why do we need to do something new? But looking at those different types of training is important. So looking at, do we have online training that we do, or do we have to develop training from bringing our own stuff in, so on and so forth. So I just like to put that out there too, because I got a little bit of an education background also, and I think it's important that if we're going to train, we need to support our people, because the long-term aspect, what we see in the insurance is, that casualty part, or the liability is really coming up on abuse prevention, right? Mm-hmm. So, we're trying to educate more of our participants in our program, in the insurance board, on how to do training, and we provide free training to all of you guys, have access to free training through us, through Presidiums. And I'm sure I'm stealing more of Jen's. She's gonna yell at me after this, I know. But I like to throw that out there so people start thinking of what's training and really what are we doing the right way.
Yeah, we also include, if you have a concern, if there's an allegation, how to report, who to talk with.
That's part of that policy part. That should be in your policy.
It is,
Yep.
but, many of my people, they signed the affidavit that said that they had read and agreed.
Yep, and that's all you need.
But when I
Right.
say to them, no, actually, you are mandated to report, what are you gonna do with an allegation that comes to you? If it's, from these categories of people, right? But it's not just the people who are in the room at the training, the whole congregation needs to know. Right?
And that's exactly what-
I wanna know that you all know, so I can feel safe bringing my grandchild to you,
Right.
right?
No, you're right, that is exactly correct. And as you were mentioning too, training staff, that means all staff, not just the staff that work with youth, because there still may be opportunities to, you know, interact and oversee things. And so it's very important that everyone has an idea of what to do.
We use, along with requiring our summer camp staff to get their clearances, there's an entire like training sequence. It is long and arduous, but it's video and slides and quizzes that we go through with all of them through the state of Pennsylvania. And they present scenarios, watching a little video of some kids interacting, and it's like, okay, what did you notice? Did you see this happen? Did you notice that that's a warning sign? And it's really helpful because the warning signs can be so subtle, but if you know what to pay attention to, and actually, last year, 2 of our younger counselors, like 16-year-olds, identified correctly a problem with a child and like came to us as the senior staff and were like, hey, we are suspecting this, and we looked into it and it got that child out of that situation.
Wow.
And it was like, good job, you guys did it, you were paying attention.
Right.
Yeah, it's a really good, it's a really good training. It's long.
Well, Chad's going to be implementing an LMS system for us, and you're talking about, you know, kind of the quizzes and things like that, and that's what he preaches, is that, you know, we want to make sure that, you know, the information is being absorbed, and, you know, we're testing that a little bit before we just say, okay, you know, this training's done, let's move on.
I mean, we like to do little role-playing scenarios for basically all of the trainings we do, so.
That's good.
It helps you process it.
And the next operation is monitoring and supervision. So this goes a lot to what Nancy was saying. So when organizations do follow clear structures in supervising employees and volunteers, the potential offenders are really less likely to act on their impulse or violate policies because they might face detection. So using multiple methods to ensure consumers are monitored, this definitely helps to avoid some of these behaviors for sure. So, you know, demonstrate supervisor roles and responsibilities, identify high-risk areas and indicators, and create a monitoring plan, you know, and keep in mind why it's important to supervise staff. It's to make sure that people are doing the jobs that they're supposed to be doing. And so you want to offer some support to that as well. So listen for needs and offer resources, advocate for staff and consumer needs, allow staff and consumers to vent, offer encouragement and empathy. And that sounds exactly like what your organization did that resulted, you know, in the 2 other youths being able to identify, you know, the particular problem. I think too, like, you know, a lot of times it's easy to get frustrated in your work situation, feel like everyone's coming to you, especially in a supervisory role with a complaint. Maybe just kind of looking at it and engaging that particular person to help you find a solution might be just, you know, a different way to approach it as well. Goes along with supervising and coaching your staff. So again, create clear expectations regarding abuse prevention, assess your staff skills, monitor expectations and performance, train and model those good behaviors, provide corrective feedback, and use positive language. Definitely want to be able to respond to physical abuse or inappropriate discipline, staff to consumer sexual abuse or boundary violations, consumer to consumer abuse, and identifying those risks. So along with that goes kind of monitoring some high risk activities, and maybe within your own organizations, you know, you can think of some examples. These might be some that may apply or not based on how your operations run. You know, whether it's a camp, you know, bathrooms and locker rooms are always challenging, maybe some transportation, all the overnight camp things. Yes?
How about, yes, with this monitoring piece, other organizations using the church facility?
Yeah.
We have said that part of our building use process is they have to be made aware of what our policy is, and we give them a copy of it. Of course, most of them are like the scouts, and they're requiring clearances and stuff anyway. But my question now, after you're saying this, we don't say that somebody from the church has to be there. Should we be saying that? That a church person should be there whenever the building's being used by some outside program? To monitor whether they're following our policy or they're following their own policies?
I'll give my opinion and then I'll let my my partner in crime here weigh in as well. But so I don't think you want to set the precedent that you are monitoring or responsible for a third-party organization that is utilizing your premises. You can definitely communicate about, your organization and what your, standards and expectations are. But you don't want to take on that additional liability and responsibility for that. Where you will protect yourself is to have a sound facility use agreement. So consult legal counsel to create that. It should have like indemnification language, hold harmless language. It should properly transfer the risk for that organization's operations on your premises, during the time that they're there. Hopefully you're listed as additional insured and you get a certificate of insurance from their insurance company to do that, but that's how you best protect yourself. You don't want to be responsible for their operations in any way.
What she said.
Hey, wow. The other thing to think about a lot of times is like our church plants or organization plants in our campuses and things like that. And what inherent risks might come with that and how that can best be monitored as well, and what access do our consumers have to that. So definitely think about how you're able to monitor these facility risks, because this is another element that really plays into this. And then create a formalized monitoring system. So, identify those situations that really pose the greatest risk of abuse in your organization. Maybe think about what specific programs or consumers increase that risk, where you've had incidents occur before, because again, past behavior is the greatest predictor of future behavior, and where incidents might be waiting to happen. So just kind of an overview of this particular section. Again, think about all of those things that we discussed. Think about your specific programs or consumers that might increase this risk. Again, those incidents in the past. And just try to be proactive about thinking about what can happen going forward. Okay, operation number 5, internal feedback system. This is all about like your data collection. So this really helps you identify gaps and opportunities within your organization, helps you identify what your strengths and weaknesses are and what you need to do to accentuate and promote the strengths of these systems. Oops, sorry. So, whether you want to collect, compile, analyze, and develop some action to that, and that could look different for each individual organization based on your operations. And then you want to communicate the data out, especially to your staff and volunteers, potentially even your consumers, depending upon, what kind of buy-in you want from them in the process. And then maybe identify and overcome some barriers to create like a healthy climate for reporting.
If I can jump in, Brian, what you were saying, how do we get these people to know and buy in?
Right.
Start collecting some of that data and say, look, during this month, we had this many incidents. If we stopped it here based on this, what would have happened if we didn't? Where would this go? And then it's a little stole. It's not 100%. But again, it starts looking at if they didn't have the certification, if they didn't have this training, if we didn't do this, what would have been the outcome? And now the reputation of our church would have been forever Penn State, right? So you do have that role there, but this is a great aspect to be able to do that, is this data collection.
And the data doesn't necessarily stop at the collector either. So, trying to figure out who needs to review it in order to be able to make decisions, whether that's long-term budgetary decisions, whether it's your board or other folks that, can get behind and support you in the decisions that you might need to make based off of what that data is telling you. And of course, obviously identifying some trends that you might encounter. Some of the barriers to reporting this is, sometimes we feel like within our organizations, we're not going to be taken seriously. Sometimes concerns, are blown out of proportion, confidentiality won't be protected, reprisal or false allegations, and then reporting against authority figures, things like that. So I think this is, something that's really challenging just with this topic in general, throughout all of these processes. So kind of keeping that in mind. And again, the more that this goes back to creating that culture of safety, the more openness you have, the more that you're communicating about it, the more that you empower, your staff, your volunteers, your consumers to be able to come to you openly and communicate about it, creates that culture as well. So again, through this process, you really get to identify your organization's strengths, opportunities, and then how to promote that. Okay, operation number 6, consumer participation. So this is an opportunity to really discuss resources for consumer education and develop a plan for their participation. So, this can include like the youth, their parents and guardians, caregivers, and the more that they know about your policy and your organization, really that's a big part of and valuable component of your risk management process. It just creates more confidence in your organization as well. So some of these best practices are going to empower the individual consumers to protect themselves from abuse, and it provides the parents, guardians, and caregivers multiple ways to report concerns to you as well. So within your organizations, what do you think are some good topics that you might be able to educate either the youth and or the parents or guardians on, or what do you do currently?
So this is my wife's idea, not mine.
Yeah.
She was a program director at a camp, and during orientation, she went over 4 rules, right, where she was everywhere with the pool. One of the things that she told the kids is rule of 3, right? You always have to travel in a group of 3, and I was amazed. These were 3rd grade and up, so the kids were a little bit more aware. But even embedding that at the beginning made compliance so much easier, because kids would say, "Oh, can you take me?" And I go, "Rule of 3." And they're like, "Oh, you're right, rule of 3. Okay, I'll grab somebody else." And so telling them at the outset really helped us navigate with staff, with the other adults. And you just have to telling the consumer, this is our rule, this is our policy, and the kids really began to understand it.
Right.
It was super helpful.
Well, and even creating fun ways to remember that. Chad will use acronyms a lot of times. I was having trouble remembering some of our values, and I've worked for this organization for 16 years, and he, gave me an acronym the other day, and it's like, that opened my eyes.
It's a funny one too.
Yeah. It's
Well, even on the radio, you would hear, we need a rule of 3 for so-and-so. And we immediately knew, we need an adult to go up and walk down to the pool with this kid. It just created this.
Yeah, and that's the institutional memory that you need,
To be clear, all my wife's credit, not my idea, just sharing her.
We'll make sure we cover it.
It's her good word, but not mine.
Yeah. Anybody else have any good examples? Okay.
With that though, with Brian, just from my church that I do a lot of our safety stuff there. Even with our youth group, high school, middle school, when we have a big event, we have a lot of weekends, so we have a weekend event that we have locked in. The first thing our youth pastor does is, here's the expectations. So that's that concept. Here's the rules. Sometimes he'll have me come up and tell the rules. And I get to play my bad cop role. Yeah. I get to play bad cop, which I love to do. But to set those, and then throughout the night or throughout the aspect, interacting and doing. But it's just set those expectations, just like your wife is doing, and setting those, so it makes that event a lot easier. They know what's right and wrong, where they should be. You don't have to yell as much. do that, so that's fine.
And it sucks, I mean, you don't get this from third graders maybe, but it takes out of the equation all the, why do we have to do this? It's like, this is what we do, this is how we are.
Yeah.
Have your own feedback.
Well, and depending upon your organization operations too, like, you know, it's an opportunity for you to educate or even help, you know, help the parents or guardians educate as well. So I think it opens up those conversations to talk about boundaries, you know, to address your organization's policies on interactions, even including online, how to talk to their loved ones if they have concerns, where to take concerns back to the organization, when to call authorities, and then how, you know, thinking about how you can educate parents and guardians with this information. There's really a lot of great online tools like that have videos, even like fun little cute ones that talk about consent and just, you know, explaining these in a really basic way that relates both to adults and youth, depending upon, you know, what you're communicating.
And just talking more about personal safety
Exactly.
with I mean, they need to learn this before they're in a place where it's part of a policy or whatever, but they should instinctively start to say, I'm not gonna go on with you, you know, or I'm not gonna go on this particular site or something on their phones. And I don't think we do that a lot in the churches.
Well, and just kind of those general strategies that will help us in life in any situation. You know, kids learn a lot about, you know, active intruder things in school or, you know, and that can apply wherever you're at as well. You know, same thing with this, whether it's, you know, talking about like de-escalation strategies even, or, you know, how to handle certain interactions. So, you know, the church oftentimes is involved in, you know, multifacets of.
We don't make that connection.
Yes,
They learn
exactly.
5 days a week and.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So again, you know, kind of thinking about this, and you have to, you know, think about your audience too, and age groups of, you know, who you're serving and what the best message is. But, you know, maybe just generally, like, again, beyond training your staff on this, but for your consumers, how offenders operate, you know, what is maybe some general guidelines that you can relay to really empower your consumers to protect themselves. And then how to recognize boundary violations. Again, you know, what you can relay about your organization's policies to your consumers and responding to warning signs. It's just a little review of this section. Okay, operation number 7, responding. So this is where you want to recognize and interrupt red flag behavior and how your organization responds to suspicions or allegations of abuse, especially within that first 24 to 48 hours, really dramatically influences the effect on both the victim, the organization, your community. So think about, you know, ahead of time what your continuum might be to respond to different situations. We'll kind of take a look at that. And how you can respond appropriately to the disclosure of abuse and why an appropriate response is important, because it reduces the risk of, you know, an incident or false allegation of abuse. You could prevent an incident that could damage your organization's reputation and lead to civil litigation and criminal charges, and help to prevent future harm to survivors and consumers. Okay, so 5-step approach to interrupting inappropriate behavior. You want to spotlight the situation, identify the concern or the issue, explain why the behavior is inappropriate, give instructions, and alert management. Like, that is a basic framework. And then some barriers are maybe someone's loyalty to the organization, questioning the credibility of the accuser, maybe even protection of that person. We kind of talked about that, you know, earlier. maybe there's no training on this, they don't know what to do. Guilt, or kind of the old thing, well, what's the use in reporting? I've done it before and nothing ever happened, so just kind of keeping these things in mind again, helping your consumers and your staff to really overcome these things is really important.
I think also providing examples, like
Yes.
I always say in our training, we give examples to different things. And one scenario, because there is that concern about like, well if I don't wanna cause trouble, these people I worship with, whatever. But I had an example from my first church where somebody witnessed something in the parking lot, reported the family. There was an investigation, it was clear there was no abuse, nothing. And the parents talked about, yeah, it was a little embarrassing and painful, but we were so grateful that somebody cared enough that they wanted to make sure our kid was safe. And so to be able to give a positive example of somebody who said it was not a legitimate,
Right.
case, but they were grateful for it anyway,
That's a great example. So again, staff concerns, red flag behavior, kind of thinking about this within your continuum of responses, but what have we done to address past behavior? How do we consider that going forward? Have we minimized or rationalized this behavior? Is that really the right response? Have we involved other departments as necessary, meaning HR? Is the person who committed the red flag behavior trainable? And so, this continuum can be looked at from doing nothing or, having some initial documentation to even termination. So really depends on the particular situation that happens, but having this sort of response system ahead of time helps you in order to be able to make timely, decisions at the moment and have your processes in place instead of, trying to put this together at the end. Potentially even something that we can add to this is some sort of performance improvement plan. Again, considering if there's patterns of incidents with this consumer, whatever back information needs to be considered as part of this decision-making process. Can our program continue to serve this consumer? And if so, what safety measures are we putting in place? And have we discussed this incident and corrective action with staff? And this might be to youth, that participate as well. If there's unfortunately, actions that they're taking that aren't healthy for the environment either, we need to consider this. And again, consumer to consumer, youth to youth, sexualized behavior. So just kind of an acknowledgement that there's not necessarily a standard definition of normal sexual curiosity. So, there's lots of things to sort of take into consideration here as you're making decisions on this and handling these incidents. So when it's really important, again, to respond immediately to behaviors, document those behaviors, keep, the reporting up to date. Again, if those consumers continue to exhibit this inappropriate behavior, you might need to escalate it by notifying parents or guardians as necessary, or even reporting to authorities. Oops. So this is just kind of like another sort of way to look at a continuum. And then, providing compassionate response. So set the right tone and timing, be transparent about how and why the incident occurred, be confident, demonstrate your action plan, offer tools and resources if needed for the survivor's recovery. I think this is the part that churches are really good at a lot of times. It's just, having a plan to begin with that can sometimes be challenging. And then having these steps ahead of time. So activate your crisis management plan. Do we all have a crisis management plan? No. Okay. So resources for that, would be important. Which, within that plan, we want to ensure the immediate safety of our consumers, follow any mandated reporting requirements, notify your crisis response team, gather that initial information, customize your communication plan, provide survivor assistance, investigate and analyze the incident. It's not listed in here, but another component of that might be to alert your insurance company You know, a lot of times there's reporting requirements that you should really consider as well. And they may have resources to help you with crisis management also. So when we talk about responding to disclosure of abuse, you know, kind of just listening, being sensitive to vague disclosures so that you're able to report what you can, avoid expressing any shock, outrage, or disbelief. Don't threaten or condemn the alleged perpetrator. Like, you just want to kind of remain neutral and gather all of the data that you can so that you can be as accurate as possible. Let the consumer know that they were right to disclose. Assure the consumer that they'll be supported. Avoid questions that would make the consumer feel responsible. Again, you know, documentation is really key, and follow your reporting procedures. So think about ahead of time, you know, so again, in the stressful situation, you're not having to figure this all out, but what should you document, you know, how are you gonna correspond with staff, parents, guardians, caregivers, things like that, and how can you ensure that your documentation remains objective. So just kind of to review this section, you want to make sure that your written procedures capture the response to red flag behaviors that don't rise to the level of abuse. So again, that continuum, what can you do to stop behaviors early? Do you have a responding procedure in place that has a clear threshold for when to reach out to parents? Your responding procedures provide a confident, compassionate, and transparent response. And do you address consumer-to-consumer incidents? Okay, number 8, administrative practices. So this is where you want to utilize your board in abuse prevention efforts. It's really important, again, you know, usually from like a budget standpoint, you know, they will know where the money needs to go sometimes. So standard risk management practices should be employed across all programs. Your board should be well informed of the risks the organization faces and operational practices in place to ensure the safety of those in care and the reputation of the organization. And I think this, you know, you want to establish these practices that, you know, go across all areas of the organization, and even considering kind of working with third parties, like we talked about the facility use agreement and things like that as well. That can extend to vendors and other things. What are some good ways that you guys currently engage your board in this process? Or what are your challenges to engaging your board in this process?
Communication.
Mm-hmm.
That goes in the challenges category.
Yeah. Like inaccessibility to them?
Not exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So we have kind of a unique situation where we have our church and then we have a large ministry arm that operates sort of by itself, sort of not. Like, it's got its own, not a board, but like a steering committee. So like there's overlap and there's individuality.
Mm-hmm.
So I work for kind of both, you know, and so in trying to figure out who should be communicating what to whom and who's working on this, because I know that there's chatter about us talking about like we need to review and update our safe church policies,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to train, but like who's actually leading this? Do I need to lead something? So like the communication seems to be very nebulous. So that's a challenge, yeah.
Well, that brings up a good point too. You know, maybe in some of these processes, also looking at different job descriptions when it comes to some of these, you know, risk management measures,
Yeah.
and making sure that, you know, creating or updating these policies are part of those particular job descriptions going forward.
We wrote in our policy that session is to review it every year.
Mhm.
Of course, would they do it if I didn't send them an email and say, hey,
Right.
guess what? It's time to do it again.
And are you updating it every year? And policies, maybe creating or updating your crisis management plan. You know, the other thing that would be important again is to determine whether your organization does have sexual misconduct liability in their overall insurance portfolio, as well as the directors and officers liability coverage, and employment practices liability, and maybe even some other coverages depending upon your operations that kind of flow into this. So, you know, asking some of these questions, knowing where to go to find out this information is all really important. You want to centralize those policies and procedures. Again, you know, having common language, knowing where to store them, you know, how different programs operate, things like that. It's all really important. And then recognizing drift. So drift is kind of, you know, where, yeah, you have those policies and procedures and people have awareness, but maybe you tend to start breaking those or not following it, or, you know, following away from the standards that you once had. You know, I think this is really easy to do in certain organizations, especially churches, because a lot of times you're run by a number of volunteers who have multiple responsibilities, tend to be overworked, you know, have to put different priorities into things. And so, you know, it's really easy for drift to occur sometimes. So just, you know, having awareness of that, and, you know, especially with some of these really important processes, kind of keeping that in mind. And we talked about the third-party relationships, and, you know, kind of identifying your particular role to the access and supervision of your consumers, not necessarily theirs. But, you know, that's an important thing to think about, like as you're having third parties utilize your premises, how do you best protect your youth or your consumers, you know, from interacting with them and things like that. And so, you know, establish those minimum expectations in the relationship in writing. And again, we kind of went through some of this when we were talking about the facility use, but, you know, having the defense and indemnity, you know, kind of naming the organization as additional insured. And again, thinking about what their operations are. So, and that's something to consult with your attorney about. So if you do have youth operations on your premises, instead of just requiring commercial general liability, you might want to also, you know, have them show proof of their sexual misconduct liability as well. Maybe workers' compensation, things like that. So just kind of think about their overall operations and, again, how best to transfer that risk, but make sure that you're documenting that you're protected as a result of that agreement and that relationship.
I'm very impressed, because I don't think I've ever seen this, is language about confirmation that the third party will report incidents or allegations, right? So many of us operate in places where the church and the community are sort of, you know, interwoven. And so people will come and say, hey, I heard something that happened at whatever. It was on our property and we had no knowledge of it, right? So.
And again, I think this is best done through contract,
Yeah.
just to be
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah.
You know,
So
again,
in that agreement, you're
yes.
gonna say.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And then provide a conduit to get it. So as part of the contract, maybe there's an incident report system that you
Yeah.
attach to it. And just all you have to do is fill this out and leave it on the desk or whatever the case may be. So, you know, when we talk about this, Jennifer's done a phenomenal job of going through all these when we talk about, you know, how do we report it? But you gotta put a process in on the reporting. Is it a digital form? Is it a written form? Is it incident, so we can get the data? So a lot of times as churches, we don't think that we need an incident report, but if you guys have been following along with this, abuse prevention touches many different groups. It's just not youth abuse prevention that we're talking about, right? It's touching third party, it's touching employment practices. Everything we do is an abuse prevention concept somewhere. So if something happens, what's our crisis response plan? What's our crisis mitigation plan? How do we talk to media if something does happen? Because you don't have that media there. So those are different things too we need to look at that coincide with it. But having a platform on how they do it is just as important too, because if you tell them in there but you don't give it to them, they're not going to do it. So adding that to it.
Right, and you know, when you have a third party in your premises and there's an issue with that third party, your church is gonna be named in the news article or named, you know, on the 6 o'clock news, or you know, they're gonna show a picture of it, even though it might have nothing to do with your operations or your negligence or anything that had to do with you, you're still gonna be brought into it. So there's, you know, potential reputational damage and things that come along with that. So, you know, having some of these processes in place, you know, just helps to better protect you as well. And then, so just kind of addressing this last particular steps. So kind of, you know, what do you need to make sure that your board's engaged? How can you think about preventing drift from occurring, and have you established those minimum expectations in writing with any third-party vendors? And again, beyond just those that are utilizing your premises, really think about like vendors, you know, and how to structure your agreements and their visits on your premises as well, and what access that they may have, because, you know, those are people that you know nothing about, you know, that can be coming on your premises, whether it's, you know, delivery persons, those working on your HVAC, or other, you know, systems within your church or organization as well. So those are the different, the 8 different components for the Presidium's safety equation. Is there kind of any other sort of struggles or challenges that your individual organizations are dealing with that you would really like to address or ask questions about that we haven't really addressed throughout the presentation today?
So my context is a little different because I'm at a higher educational
Sure.
institution and bigger staff, bigger administration. My guess is that while I can drive process and sort of draft and recommend things, these are the sorts of things that are best sort of blessed and sanctified by the HR department. Like that's where they should sort of officially be issued, rather than from the random guy down the hall who teaches and runs the program.
Yeah, or a lot of campuses or higher education organizations do have like a risk management department. I'm not sure if that
We
applies.
downsized that guy 5 years ago.
Okay, gotcha.
Then you already do the first day.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Good decision on our part, well done.
Yeah, so HR then would probably be the most appropriate.
So but now you have to be that conduit to HR. You gotta be the cheerleader that pushes that. Because if we're not already having it in place, something you need to look at. Yeah, that's.
Did you have something, Jim?
Nitpicky question, but
I'm
it's
sorry,
where I'm
we don't-
getting pushback.
Might help.
I have a lot of elderly volunteers. Part of our background check process, we do drug testing, which is hideously expensive. And every time we do, 50% of the volunteers have a prescription for something.
I thought you were gonna say the marijuana come back.
Well, some of
Medicinal,
them,
sorry, for
Yeah.
medicinal purposes.
some of them have a prescription. Is it important? If they pass everything else and they have a prescription for something? They're on ADHD meds if they're younger, they've got pain meds if they're older. At what point do we take this stand, or do we just say, why are we spending money on this?
You're standing up there.
He's like, I'm glad I'm not.
I'm glad I didn't say
Or
it.
should you
No.
just include in your interview, like your questions were kind of leading to some things like, so, if we require a drug test, will you pass? And
And,
see how they respond to that?
See, but
do I care what
As a
grade?
decisive-
But,
My
right,
answer
right,
is my
yeah.
question, do I care?
so
No.
the answer is this, and you're not gonna like it.
Uh-huh.
I care.
No. I care, because it's important. So the answer is this, all of it's gonna be based on situational concepts. So what you have to do as an organization is get together with the general counsel and say, all right, what are some, in your committee, what are some narcotics that if they test positive for, will or will not affect the way they interact with our youth and vulnerable adults? So
Are they
what's that
driving?
interaction?
You know, are they gonna be driving or?
Right. Are they driving? Is the medicinal purpose that, you know, I have a script for 5 milligrams of marijuana daily. Will that affect and hinder what I need to do from a safety standpoint? So it's all going to be different, and that's why there's no straight up answer. As a church, and you always should have, anytime dealing with policy or this, somebody with a law degree, I'm not that, saying, all right, here's where we're thinking, how does this apply? Will this be good or not? Honestly, I'm trying to think who even else does drug testing for their background checks.
Yeah,
I'm
or
not
I would
talking-
say consult with an HR representative too, because I think some of this, you know, might be HIPAA, that, you know, that you
Right.
need to
Yeah, that's the
consider.
HIPAA
Yeah.
nightmare, like, I'm not touching that
Right.
information.
So
Yeah.
that,
I don't want it.
I'm surprised they're doing
I
narcotics.
know our summer camp does drug tests. And we've been doing it in our congregation, and it's, oh gosh, it's expensive.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And when we're talking 30 volunteers. And we've got 50 people in the pew on Sunday.
yeah, I would definitely recommend consulting with some sort of HR consultant that can advise, you know, if for your particular state, if that is common anymore, and, you know, if it is a good practice to continue, and if so, how can you best manage that going forward?
Can it be more of see now, this has opened a can of worms for my summer camp staff, because I know a couple of those kids are getting high sometimes. Not during summer camp, I'm just thinking of them now, and they're gonna try to be staff, and I'm like, okay. But in our policies for them to be hired and be part of camp, there's a lot of language in there, like, if this happens, goodbye. Like, you know, you're done, you're terminated. Expectations and behaviors, so could it be like instead of a preventative thing, could it be if we have reason to suspect that you are abusing a substance, you will need to pay for drug testing for us? Something like, right, like make it like a, hey, or something like that, like, you know, workshop that, that's just.
Yeah, I guess again, I think it's something, that's a recommendation that needs to come from like an HR.
Oh,
professional
definitely,
on how
yeah.
to implement that into your process.
Yeah. Because you know it's not needed for everyone, but there might be a couple people.
And if you don't have an HR person, if you call, look up your local
We have an
SHRN.
HR that we can ask,
Okay.
but
What if
it's-
you are pre-registered?
it's not immediate, it's up
Yeah,
up
it's
the
just a
chain,
thought
but
there.
I can call Beverly.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at that also.
Yeah, or maybe like even networking with like your chamber of commerces and like different, you know, business executives that might, you know, lend their expertise within that group, might be willing to help you or something like that too. Anyone else?
One other thing, from online was asked earlier, the training that you were talking about was asked about. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. I apologize. Becky.
Sorry, I
No, you're
lost
fine.
my thing.
Do you happen to know what that training?
So yeah, I did find it, well, I think I found it, but there's a whole bunch of them, so I wonder if we kind of like.
Combine?
Yeah, so it really is just on pa.gov.
Okay.
And it's their section for mandated reporters. There's a whole bunch there. I found a better result by just searching mandated child abuse trainings. But I do recognize a lot of these that are basically to help you with mandated reporter stuff. There's a good one, especially I recognize on the site about how to report child abuse or neglect as a mandated reporter. It's just the name of the page. So yeah, they offer a lot of things. It is nice.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
And then Chad had mentioned earlier some of our resources. So our organization, serving the 6 denominations that we do, we make free online abuse prevention training available to all of the denominations. So that's Presbyterian Church USA, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, Reformed Church in America, United Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ, and Alliance of Baptists. So you would just go online, sign up as an administrator for your organization, and the individual can be set up to take the trainings. They receive an individual certificate, as well as you as the administrator can see the back office information of who has completed what training. There's also accessibility to discounted background screening services. We subsidize half the cost for participants of our program, but it's still a discounted rate otherwise. We also sponsor the Abuse Prevention Helpline, which Presidium receives those calls and responds to them for APCE USA that was launched at the Portland General Assembly, I think in 2016. There's an assessment tool that's available on the site where you can go in and answer questions about like your existing abuse prevention policy, and it can kind of help you grade it and identify some gaps in the policy and plan for some improvements. There's a policy template if you need to create a new policy like Chad mentioned. Again, it's not plug and play, you have to make it livable to your organization. But lots of resources on there as well. We have a quarterly newsletter you can sign up for if you're interested. Feel free, to contact me if you have any questions, and I can kind of direct you to where you need to go within our organization if it's not something that I can answer. But thank you for participating today. It's good to see everybody. Hope everyone has a nice, safe travels home and not too snowy or icy and everything else.
Of course, that 1 mile can take anywhere from 8 minutes.